Hi, folks. Thank you for those who have joined us right on the dot. We'll probably give people a couple of extra minutes to slowly trickle in as well before we get officially kicked off. But really appreciate that you made it on time, especially during this lunch period. Feel free as well to either leave your cameras on or off. If you're munching on a sandwich at the moment, feel free to keep it off if you like. But please do stay on mute if you can for the time being. We'll have a section later on where we can ask some questions as well, where we'll get people to come off mute. I'll provide those instructions again in a few moments' time when a few more people um, join us. But while we're waiting for folks to trickle in, I may as well go through some of the preamble. So thank you everybody for joining our, oops, I've got this thing being displayed. Thank you everybody for joining us at this FAQ webinar session. It's relatively informal, like I said earlier. So we will have a space a little bit later on to talk about I have questions and answers as well. And before I get fully kicked off, I'd also like to just quickly acknowledge the traditional owners on the lands on which we're meeting today. So I'm currently in Melbourne, so that's the Wurundjeri peoples for us down here. But I'd like to extend my my respects to elders past, present, and emerging on all the places on which we're meeting today as well. For those who have just joined us, thank you for coming to this webinar session. Please do put yourself on mute, but we will have a Q&A session a little bit later on down the track. Today is very much an FAQ session. So as a high level, our agenda today will focus on three main sections. One's a very high level, very high level recap of the webinar that we held just last month, which actually talked through the entire funding round at a high level. Today is a special session to sort of deep dive into some of the more frequently asked questions to help perhaps tackle some of those so that we can all, as a collective group, sort of be across some of those things that come up quite frequently. We do want to get your questions as well today, so please feel free as I'm going through some of the preamble today to, if you think of questions you'd like answered, start putting them into the chat. We'll take a note of them, and at the right part of the agenda, we'll start going through those one at a time as well. Okay, so more information about our funding round can also be found on our SmartCrete website under the funding section right here. And of course, the biggest question is, when is the submission deadline? The submission deadline is the 9th of September. So nice and easy to remember, hopefully. So as a quick recap, thank you all for coming to SmartCrete CRC's FAQ session. Hopefully most of you have been to our funding round webinar that was held last month, like I said. But for those who haven't, and this is your first interaction with us, that's okay. I'll go through a very quick recap. So who are we? Who are SmartCrete? We're a CRC, a cooperative research center. The purpose of the CRC program is to fund R&D projects where some of the challenges can't be resolved by any single business or any single research organization by themselves. That's why the first C is the cooperative aspect of other research that we look at. So the problem spaces that SmartCrete CRC obviously cares about are all within the concrete space. So we have programs that focus on sustainability of concrete and new engineered concrete solutions and the way that our concrete assets are managed as well. So those are generally the themes that we care about as part of our portfolio. As a very high-level summary of our funding structure, we do have a minimum requirement for the projects to have at least a $200,000 budget, from which $100,000 of that be matched by SmartCrete CRC. So the funding for the cash budget should be half SmartCrete CRC and half funding from our industry participants in this project. Our maximum investment at the moment can be up to $2 million for one project. So it's potentially likely that you might want to submit a very large project, but that's kind of an upper ceiling at the moment, is to have $2 million from SmartCrete and $2 million from our industry participants, just based on the amount of funding we have available at the moment. So just to reiterate, if the total cash budget of a project is the minimum at $200,000, that means 50% comes from SmartCrete, 50% comes from industry. This $40,000 or 20% research admin fee This is based on the research organization's partnership with the SmartCrete CRC. So that would come out of a different funding pool and doesn't come out of the cash budget for the project. We talked a lot during the webinar as well about in-kind. So in-kind is just our way of being able to capture the value of all the things that need to be contributed for successful research projects, which may not necessarily be the cash budget of the project. So that could be things like facilities or equipment or materials or products or access to certain technologies provided by those who are involved in the project but aren't the research organization. Similarly, that might also include staff. So if there's subject matter experts from your business or operational staff that need to be involved, because they aren't research staff, we would love to count their time as in-kind time. We can go through a bit more information about in-kind later on if we'd like to deep dive on some of those aspects as well, because for some of you that might be a very familiar concept, but for others it may not necessarily be as common a thing for you on your day-to-day business. So as I said, the submission timeline, the deadline is the 9th of September, closing at 5 p.m. We will then have a preliminary assessment period where the team here at SmartCrete will go through and prepare your proposals for our approvers. So during that time, we might come back to yourselves with clarification questions, or there might be some areas where we have some key suggestions that might need to be fixed real quick. So ideally, we're hoping for a quick turnaround to review some of these projects initially, and hopefully there isn't too many questions back to yourselves, because what we really need to do is start to prepare those for our investment committee. And our impacting investment committee will be meeting this time around in late September or sometime in later September, which really means that projects do have to come in as on time as possible to make sure that we have that wiggle room. And then by early October, we should be able to have some news about whether or not your project has been successfully approved for funding. And at that stage, we'd be working with yourselves to prepare some agreements for that kind of contracting process. Okay, so for those, like I mentioned, who were unable to make the webinar that went through the full details of our funding round, please do go visit our SmartCrete CRC YouTube channel. We unfortunately weren't able to record properly the July webinar, but we do have one all the way from December, which basically goes through exactly the same kind of information. So you wouldn't have missed out too much if you weren't able to make the July one. Okay, so as I said, so today is very much focused on tackling some of the more frequently asked questions that you might have. And now is a good time, if you have some questions, to please also think about putting some of those into chat, and we'll circle back to them. In the meantime, while you're thinking about questions, some of those might be answered already in this list of FAQs, which we'll be going through. So here you can see that the first question is all about the deadline for submission. The first question actually is more about, can you come and talk to us? What's the process to engage with us as you're preparing those submissions? The third question here is about future funding rounds. The teaser trailer for that is it's unlikely to be future funding rounds. And what are some of the pathways for impact? Start and end dates for proposals, the way that budgets can be used, and the preparation for proposal documents. Some of those roles and responsibilities there. So I'm going to go through some of these one by one now. Okay, so can we talk to SmartCrete before the deadline of the 9th of September? The answer there is 1000% yes, apparently. I've got an extra zero there. We, the portfolio team, so that's myself, that's Professor Voot, Siri Vivatnanon, sorry Voot, and Lydia Gunawan, as well as the other members of our team, we're all very happy to answer some of the questions you might have about our proposals. Our proposal document is relatively long, we acknowledge that, but it's no different to the majority of the kinds of grants or business case documents that you may have prepared in the past, but we might use slightly different words to capture some of that information. So we do know that can be a little bit confusing. So do feel free to reach out to us directly. We're very happy to engage with yourselves. What we find is that when projects come in on the night or on the deadline and they haven't engaged with us, we end up having to ask a whole bunch of questions sometimes. which makes things a little bit challenging to squeeze everything in ahead of our approval periods. So do please reach out, let us know nice and early, and that way we can also keep an eye out for your proposals as they get submitted to us as well. The next question is there any flexibility on the submission deadline? Like I said, the answer is definitely no. The deadline is very much aligned to when our independent investment committees and board approvals meet. So missing the key dates will often mean that your submission may not be able to make it into that pre-reading period for this group. And if it misses that pre-reading period, then unfortunately we won't be able to put it in front of our approvers because it would be unfair for the others. Will there be another funding round in the future? The answer is it is unlikely. SmartCrete CRC is a program that runs between 2020 and 2027. So it's very much in our interest to fully allocate our Commonwealth funding pool well ahead of our closing date. So SmartCrete wraps up in the middle of 2027, June 2027 to be precise. And because of that, because we've been so successful in allocating our Commonwealth funding, there's not too much left. So I do really want to stress that this is an important consideration for when you'd like to submit a proposal. Ideally, please do try your best to aim for this 9th of September period. Of course, there might be a weird situation where perhaps the proposals, none of them go through for whatever reason. Who knows? You never know in these sort of weird, wacky days. But there could potentially be a situation where there may be funding remaining, but I wouldn't necessarily bet on that. This is a question that comes up a lot. So a lot of the times the research outputs from our portfolio and our program, some of them are commercial in nature, but some of them may be more about providing and creating new knowledge. And in those situations, is it still important to fill in the commercialization and impact sections of our project proposals? The answer is, of course, yes. But instead of focusing then your content on the commercial nature and the commercial steps of your project outputs reaching a broad audience, instead focus more on how utilization and access will happen. Does this new knowledge need to be hosted somewhere where there's costs involved? Is there industry engagement that needs to happen? And there might be some resources that are required for that kind of engagement. What does that look like? So our approvers at SmartCrete look at not only just the great outcomes of a project, but how those outcomes really make a broad, wide-reaching impact on the broader industry. This is a question that comes up all the time, which is, can the budget of the project be used to pay for my non-research organization's expenses when collaborating on this proposal? So examples of this might be things like staff time from a business who's collaborating on this project, or materials and inventory that's consumed as part of a collaboration on this project. So unfortunately, these kinds of internal costs cannot be covered by the program. Our program only funds expenses incurred by the research organization. So that's research staff time and potentially some non-capitalized equipment and facilities and materials as well. Having said that, though, we do really, really value capturing the kind of value that our collaborating participants provide to projects. This is the in-kind contributions, and our approvers will definitely see how much in-kind value is necessary for this project. And it's a great demonstration for our approvers to show just how serious the intent is of the industry participants in really collaborating and really providing a lot of input into this research to make sure that it's a success. So in our project plans, there's lots of sections that ask lots of specific questions about in-kind and how to calculate that. More information can be found in our funding guidelines as well, but this is often a confusing part. So if you're not used to the concept of in-kind, the first port of call is if you're from the industry and you're working already with a researcher who's helping you to draft these documents, then often our researchers are really quite well versed. The research community is well versed at calculating in kind. But for those who still have questions, again, please do reach out. we're here to help. Okay, so another question sometimes is whose job is it to fill in the proposal documents? My simple answer here is whoever is best placed and everyone involved. So there are three key sections in our project plans. The first section is very much about the context and background and why this project is so important and what kinds of industry challenges are being tackled during this project. So this would be a great combination of understanding, if it's an industry problem, I'd suggest that the industry folks involved in the project will have the most intimate knowledge of what the information is that needs to be conveyed. When it comes to the middle section, which is all about the project plan itself, then I'd suggest the researchers can take the lead there in terms of describing what methodology is being taken, what activities are being conducted, and what kinds of resources are needed for that to be executed well. And then the last section is that impact and commercialization plan, which again, I think kind of falls back to the industry folks to provide a little bit of a lens on how the outcomes of the project will be leveraged by businesses, be leveraged by customers. What does that look like? Is there a model for that to be distributed broadly? And I'd suggest that the industry folks would be best placed to take the lead on some of that content there. But just like how the program is a cooperative research program, the development of a project should also be cooperative in that nature as well. Okay, so a very important question is when should the start and end dates of your proposal be? Let's start with the start date. So the start date should be as soon as I suppose is practical. So please do consider things like the availability of key staff. Do they already exist in the organizations or do they need to be hired in? Are the materials available? Are there any other kinds of resources, facilities, or access that you might need? So examples of projects that have kicked off really quickly. So we have had projects approved. My record currently is a project that was approved in November of last year and then kicked off in December. So about 2 or 3 weeks really, actually. So that can be a possibility if you've lined up all your ducks. Having said that, though, if your project is relying on staff that need to be brought in, do please also plan ahead. Project end dates, as I mentioned, the CRC project operations will conclude on the 30th of June in 2027. So please do plan your project to end well ahead of 30th of June. We all know that the best laid plans don't survive the first battles, so there's probably going to have some wiggle room built into your plan to take into account things like delays or issues or even the weather. A core consideration, therefore, is between now and June 2027, this doesn't leave enough time for example, a full 3-year PhD stipend period. So in that case, we actually suggest that most of the projects we'd like to see this time around not be completely focused on being a PhD project because of that reliance on a 3-year period. Students are, of course, welcome to participate in the projects, but in terms of accommodating for that full 3-year period, you might have to come up with some kind of a compromise. I've seen some suggestions of student periods students working on the projects for 2 years or so to do the experimentation work, and that's covered under the project expenses. And then that final year being covered by some other kind of external scholarship, maybe the university scholarship, for example, to cover that final year for that student to complete the thesis, but the research activities are completed well ahead of that time. That's an example of what folks are considering. But your organization, your university may have different policies around this. So please do check. I'm going to leave that there then in that case. I did say that coming to engage with us at SmartCrete is important, but I've actually forgotten to mention that engaging with folks from the University Research Office, whose job it is to help support you in your endeavors in generating new projects and applying for grants, they're also really helpful to provide any input for you as well, any guidance that might be specific to your university's policies and processes. So please do go talk to them as well and make sure they're completely across things. So that's the end of my planned section. So I know we whipped through that quite quickly. I wanted to leave a whole bunch of room for this group. If you have further questions, if you wanted more clarifications, now's the time. So please feel free to either type a message directly into the chat and we'll get around to it, or feel free to come off mute and we can have a chat about that over the next few minutes as well. So does anybody here have any burning questions they'd like us to touch on?
Thank you. Now, I know I've asked you this a while ago, but I thought I'd just try my luck again. Is there any chance that is there any chance you can reduce the minimum? 100K is a lot for the stuff that I do at our Water Corp.
Yeah. The short answer is that because we're such a small team, and sorry, not the short answer. This is probably a long answer. The short answer is no. We don't have too much flexibility, but we can obviously assess case by case depending on sort of the need and the value of the project. The long answer is that because we're a small team, the amount of effort required to set up, contract, and govern a project that's a small project versus a big project is more or less the same in as far as staff requirements go here. So we do have that cap simply because we can't have a long tail end of projects. And so we optimize for projects which are roughly around that size we described of 100K plus. We can have a bit more of a deeper dive into your question though, Haley, and perhaps there's some alternative ways we can think about managing a project that you might have within scope for your organization.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
I might contribute here too.
Yes, please.
I think there may also be opportunities for industry bodies to get together and fund projects which are of common interest. And that way, I think you can put your resource together so that our project is of reasonable size for us to manage, I guess. Do explore with us because we are in contact with everyone at the moment, so we may know of other people who are interested in similar work, but with also limited funding, I think.
Great, thank you.
And also, we'll be keeping an eye on some of the proposals that come through, and if there's significant overlap, we might actually connect folks together.
Excellent. Thank you.
Hello, I have a question, probably a couple of questions.
Yes, go ahead.
First thing, is it limited to have only one application or can we have two applications? We have two projects that fits the criteria for CRC. Can we put two applications?
Yes, absolutely. So if you like to keep yourself very, very busy, then absolutely, please feel free to submit two projects and run them concurrently.
No, that's right. Because both of them are very much aligned with the requirement for the burning issue of the industry right now.
Yeah.
Okay. And the second one, well, probably I will talk to you in detail personally. Okay. And second one is about the industry participation. Because in the application on the first page, there are two columns. One is for the participant, one is for the industry participant. So can both be the same, or we need industry participant apart from who we are applying as the main applicant?
Yes. So all our projects need to have at least a minimum of one research organization who's executing on the work. Yes. And one industry participant who's investing in that research. They cannot be the same group.
No, I understand. The research could be separate organization, but the other industry participation, do we need, we are a company who are investing into the research, but do we need another industry partner to fund the research as well?
No, you don't have to have, you don't have to have several industry participants collaborating on funding that together. The opposite is true for folks like Haley, where perhaps it might be in the benefit of the industry to collaboratively fund together. But a single business can fund a project by themselves working with a university.
Okay. Yeah, that answers my question. Thank you.
All right. Great question, Nishant. Thank you. Okay, we'll give folks a couple of extra seconds to think about more questions. As I said, please do reach out though if you do think of questions after this session as well. Voot and I will make ourselves very available if we can to review these things. Haley asked a great question. How much funding do we actually have left? Not much. I think we have the sort of upper limit of $2 million for the maximum size project is a pretty good indication of how much funding we do have left. If somebody comes in with a $2 million project, actually, then it would be quite interesting trying to figure out how we allocate what's left. I think we have about $2.7-ish million left, but some of that's somewhat pre-allocated to projects which came in a little bit earlier.
I think perhaps one question that has been raised elsewhere is whether a university who is not a member of SmartCrete CRC can get involved. I think here may be a good place to let everyone know as well.
Yes, that is a really good question. We've opened the program up for universities who aren't formal partners with the CRC to participate. So if you are one of those universities, there is one thing to be mindful of, which is that research operating fee for the program. So I'll scroll up to this diagram. Each of the universities that participates with the SmartCrete program pays an administration fee into the program, a partnership fee. So we don't have fees for industry partners. So every dollar that the industry puts into a project goes towards the project and not the program. But we would then expect a university, if it's a new university especially, who doesn't currently have pre-allocated administration fees with the CRC, to come up with that 20% of that total cash budget. So if you're working with a university in that situation, or you are from a university in that situation, please do reach out to your research office people to let them know that this is your intent, nice and early, because they will be the ones who will be able to help work with you to see where they can source this fee, the cost of this fee from, whether that comes from a research office fund or whether it comes from the faculty or a school. Different universities have different mechanisms that you may need to align with. It's a good point, Voot. That does come up a lot.
Thank you.
Looks like we've got someone typing in the chat. Can SmartCrete help link industry partners to universities to access this funding? Yes, we can. If you have a very specific problem type that needs a specific set of research capability, we do have a pretty vast network of folks that we can introduce you to, who might be well placed to help you resolve that particular research area. No worries, Simon. Okay. Seeing as we aren't receiving any more questions in the chat so far, I'm going to give folks one last chance to ask a question while I'm closing us out. So
can you, sorry, one thing. Can you please share your contact details?
Contact details? Yes. So at the moment, the best way to find us is to go through our info link. Oopsie daisy, I've gone too far. 1 second. So info@SmartCrete. Oh my gosh,
yeah.
why is info@SmartCreteCRC.com.au. That's probably the best way to contact us, and then we'll triage you to the right person in the team to answer your specific question. If it's something that's governance related, might come to me. If it's something quite technical and concrete specific, I'll have to humbly ask Professor Vu to help us out with those sort of questions.
Okay, thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Nishant. Okay, brilliant. Thanks for that last question then. In that case, I might close this out a little bit early and give yourselves a bit more time back in your busy schedules. Really appreciate your time, and thank you for sitting in on our FAQ webinar today. Looking forward to seeing all of your proposals.
Thank you.
Thanks, you.
Cheers. Thanks.